Hello, everyone. This is Komal Datlani, CEO and co-founder at Lab4U. And today, oh my God, we've got a special guest, and I am very happy and excited to be speaking with someone I admire profoundly. I am speaking with someone who does not only have experience in education, but has been a STEM edtech entrepreneur for many years. He's someone I've learned so much over the past few years. He is none other than James Caras. Thank you so much, James, for joining us in this podcast.
Well, you're very welcome. And I've had the pleasure of knowing you for many years, so I'm glad that we could get together.
Yeah, I'm very excited too, and I'm very happy. And for our audience who's going to be listening, this podcast, Lab4U Talks, in the US, in Latin America, I just want to tell you briefly a little bit more about James, because I won't read his entire curriculum because it's a very big curriculum, but I just want to share some highlights so that you can also know with whom we are speaking today. James has a bachelor's degree in chemistry from University of California, Santa Barbara, and he did his PhD in biochemistry. And that's something that unites us both because we are both from the biochemical background. But over the course of the years, James has managed to build STEM edtech companies that have been very successful over time. He was the founder and general manager of Sapling Learning, which I'm sure many of you know, and was part of the portfolio of Macmillan. So Macmillan acquired Sapling Learning, and James became the president of STEM learning at Macmillan New Ventures. And that is not enough. After that, he became the chief product officer and vice president of STEM digital strategy at Macmillan Learning, where he was leading all the products in STEM digital strategy. And we're speaking about 2016. And now you think of 2020 during COVID. Imagine all that learning that is being applied today in his new venture called Catalyst Education, where they are building software that helps instructors inspire students to become the next generation of instructor scientists and problem solvers. Their first product, LabFlow, which I'm sure many of you already use and know, saves lab teaching faculty time and provides insights into the teaching and learning with their coast. This improving learning for students and empowering mentoring of lab teaching assistants. James, thank you so much for joining us today at Lab4U Talks.
Well, thank you again. And I don't think I could have done a better job myself talking about our own products. So you're more than welcome. You're more than welcome to join me on any call that I have with faculty.
No, James. I always learn. I think it's important for the audience to know that whenever I speak with James, I learn so much from him. He's got so much field experience speaking to so many faculty members, speaking to educators, and building products that solve real problems. So, James, tell us a little bit more. Why did you start this venture, Catalyst Education, and what exactly does LabFlow do?
Well, I think it comes down to really my mission all through my career has been to help students understand and discover a love for science. And so, even as an undergraduate and then in graduate school, I was involved in tutoring. I was involved in preparing students for the MCAT. And then as a graduate student, I fell in love with teaching students and actually taught biochemistry at the University of Texas after getting my PhD. And I taught both lecture and lab courses. And my challenges in the lab courses were that I was teaching 550 students. I didn't have TAs that were assigned to me. There's no way I could grade homework, but I knew my students weren't doing the homework that I was suggesting. And so their midterm and final exam scores suffered greatly. And I simply asked my students, after getting very disappointing results, to raise their hand if they waited till within 48 hours of the exam to even crack the book and start studying. And about 70% of the class owned up to that's what they did. And I said, if you think you can learn 7 weeks of biochemistry in 2 days, that's just not going to happen. And so I started building using technology
Mm-hmm.
to build a homework platform
Okay.
for my students and basically hold them accountable so that they wouldn't fall behind. And every week they'd have to go in and do some problems, engage with their lecture notes, engage with the textbook, engage with whatever resources they had.
Mm-hmm.
And then I read an article that said that it was in the New York Times, and it was a study of STEM majors, and they were talking about how it was so critical to the success of the global economy. It was so critical to solving all the problems facing the world today, whether it's climate change,
Mm-hmm.
hunger, or various problems. And what they concluded after interviewing a bunch of STEM majors about why they were in STEM, or why they had dropped out of STEM, what they found is that about 50% of STEM majors changed their minds and
Oh,
switched
wow.
majors.
Yeah.
And that was very disappointing given the importance that it has towards the world really in general and society at large.
Right.
And when they asked them, why, it basically came down to that the courses were really hard,
Mm.
they were grueling, and then they looked at, the average grade given out by a STEM course was about half a letter grade lower, because you don't have the grade inflation in STEM courses. It's
Mm.
very, your scores are based upon how many problems you can get right on these exams. And so that was something that really I became passionate about, is how can we improve the persistence
Mm.
of students in these STEM courses. They obviously declared that major because they walked into college loving science and being very interested in it, maybe wanting to be the next Carl Sagan, right?
Right. Right.
But it was the grueling nature of the problem solving and the really difficult topics that they were facing that eventually, unfortunately, either drove the love of the discipline out of them, or just they felt like they couldn't hack it anymore and couldn't hold up to their peers. And so I wanted to change that. And so through technology, I started building platforms that coach students as they're solving problems. And that's where I founded Sapling Learning, my first company. And then, but I also taught lab courses. And when I sold Sapling to Macmillan, I knew exactly what I wanted to do, that I wanted to form a company that was focused, essentially maniacally focused on laboratory education. And I know that there were so many challenges. And I think, you've decided to focus on lab courses as well, with Lab4U. And I think that's, I'd love to hear why you decided to do that.
No, what you say just touches our hearts, because science education does not have to be so difficult and theoretical with how we knew it in the past centuries, right? So the article that you read, and the experiences that you were living during your teaching led you to start with Sapling, and that led you to work in Macmillan. And what you share about driving away the love of the discipline, and so many just leaving the science careers when they could have been the next Carl Sagan or Einstein or Marie Curie's, and just because they did not have a good science education lab experience, they decide to drop out or to leave that career. So what you say is crucial, and as well as in Lab4U, just answering your question. For us, in your case, more in the higher ed, for us in K-12, the same happens, right? Students, they don't engage with the science classes because it's very theoretical. And now during COVID, teachers are struggling on how to engage with their students when they don't even have access to their labs. And if they many districts and many schools did not even have labs in their schools. So how can we actually learn science if we don't experience it? And that's why the lab experience is so important. And for me at Lab4U, just like you studied biochemistry. I also studied biochemistry, and during my science education, the lab experience was so important. And when we did not have that lab experience where we were actually learning by doing, not only with the right pedagogy where inquiry-based learning is important, and we have an episode about inquiry in our podcast as well, but just living the experience and helping teacher with their lab experiments has been very important to us at Lab4U. James, I'm very curious to know how today during COVID, how are you helping faculty members with LabFlow? So, what exactly are they doing? And because everybody's struggling during COVID-19, right? But I would love to know how are your users actually living this experience during COVID-19? If you can share an anecdote, if you can share your experience.
Well, we got a tremendous amount of interest in what we were doing because of COVID-19. And that this pandemic is such a, really difficult time for a lot of people. And it's one thing for people who teach lecture courses to
Mm-hmm.
transition online, and that's challenging enough. But
Mm-hmm.
lab courses require that in-person experiential learning, mixing things with your hands,
Mm.
pouring things, using equipment. And it's very challenging to deliver lab courses, but students have to make progress towards their major.
Mm.
College can be very expensive. They can't
Mm.
just sit out a year. And so universities had to offer some experience. And a lot of universities this fall, certainly in the States, have tried to go hybrid where they're, some went
Mm.
online 100%, but a lot are trying to do, distance,
Mm.
inside lab courses and go every other week inside the lab and then 1 week at home. And so we built and changed our platform, which was being used to wrap digital curriculum around traditional in-person wet lab experiences.
Mm-hmm.
But we tweaked our software about in March of last year when the pandemic really hit and it became obvious that this was going to change education forever.
Mm.
We made it so that our software could basically deliver videos showing the experiments,
Mm.
showing how to use the techniques, showing how to use each piece of equipment. And then we would provide them with sets of data as if they had been in the labs doing the same stuff they were watching on videos, and randomizing it so students just couldn't rampantly copy each other's work. And
That is
that's one of the
so important.
challenges. Yeah,
That
it's one of the challenges.
what James has just said for our listeners is just so important. That feature at LabFlow, if we can dig a little bit deeper, so it's not just a virtual experience. You're actually sending them data, randomized data, so that they can live that lab experience themselves.
Yeah, and they still have to analyze it and do all the things and draw conclusions from it like they would before. And what's really nice about what we've done is that it works in either scenario. So it's not some immersive 3D virtual world that they have to do experiments in, but then when
Right,
they go to do the experiment in person, it's very different.
right.
Our system, the students do the same experiments, write the same lab reports, analyze the same type of data, whether they're in person or online. And so whether it's an entire section of students or class of students who are moving week to week online and in person, or maybe you just have a few students that fall ill and need 1 or 2 weeks to recover, they can push out our platform. And without even lifting a finger, an instructor doesn't even have to care whether the student's in person or online
Oh,
doing that
wow.
experiment. And
Wow.
that was helpful because there was so much stress and anxiety around students returning to classes.
Right.
And just anything you can make it very easy for faculty was greatly appreciated by them.
Right, right. I want our listeners to just analyze what James has just said. So this is working hybrid model. You can either do it at home with the data that Labflow is sending you, or in faculty, in person. And this is not, as James said, a virtual experience where it's completely different to the real experience. This is actually how the lab is. I have a follow-up question on that, James. It might be a bit tricky to answer, because I know many who are doing some fantastic work in the virtual world, and we know many solutions that have virtual labs. But I would love to know, what's your opinion about virtual labs, and why is Labflow exactly different to virtual labs? And there probably I can share a little bit why Lab4U is different to the virtual labs.
Yeah, I mean, I really like the approach that you've taken because it combines both hands-on chemistry or physics or, hands-on science with the ability to do it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to have expensive equipment and all this stuff around you. You can open up those hands-on experiences that I think are so important, and many faculty are looking for. When I was at the University of Texas, I was awarded a number of grants to develop technologies for chemistry courses. And one of the grants was to develop virtual lab experiences, and we built them. And the challenge was that students really didn't like them. What they found is that once the gee whiz factor wore off, which was pretty soon, and these are connoisseurs of high intensity, they play 3D video games that are so off the charts, almost photorealistic these days.
Yes.
And so that novelty wears off really quick.
Yes.
And it was really hard for us to develop software that delivered those experiences in a way, because in the lab, the student has access to a TA or faculty. So when they're struggling and they don't know how to do something, or maybe the equipment's not assembling in the proper way and they're confused, they have someone there that's there to help them. But virtual lab experiments, you're kind of alone. And it's 10 o'clock at night. You've got to complete this lab by midnight, and you're having trouble figuring out what to do, and there's no one there to help you. And that's a real challenge, is that instructional support, which is so critical. But then, so your alternative is to make the experiments kind of keep the students on a rail. And then students feel like, I feel like if a monkey, was put in front of this, if they could read, they could do it, because it's just telling you exactly what to do.
Right.
And so like you were saying, inquiry is so important to giving young scientists this understanding that they can explore the world around them, draw their own conclusions, test hypotheses. And if you put them on rails, they don't feel that way. They feel like you're just wasting their time, and they're just spending 3 hours moving a virtual, piece, hand around, or a pipette. And so, I think we've taken this approach, which is to deliver an experience that is as near to the lab in terms of like seeing videos of real world stuff. When we present data to students, we're not just presenting them a number. They still have to analyze like a volumetric measurement, or they still have to watch, some crystals melting and determine what the melting point of something is. And so it's kind of a hybrid approach even within that experiment. And, I love what companies like yours are doing, which allows students to use the devices they already have and walk around in their pockets to explore science and do true inquiry, which is great.
Right. No, and that's why we are very much aligned in taking inquiry from a very practical perspective, where students experiment. They have a hypothesis, they test it out. These are real data. In the case of Labflow, right? You're sending them this data as if they were in the real field. Let's say if they're working in a lab that's solving one of the world's biggest challenges, probably an SDG challenge. You mentioned some of those challenges, right? Just like in the real world. Whereas the virtual environment it's like, riding a bicycle virtually, and not really riding the bicycle as it is, right? And as an analogy, and in that case, in order to truly develop skills that we need, as scientists, while we're solving issues, while we testing our hypothesis, we need that inquiry based learning, where the question is so important, and the instructional design of all these lab coursework are so important. And I know that you and your team have worked really hard to have proper instructional design in all your content and all the lab that you have, which is fantastic. And that's something that we also work, especially in high school and first year labs, for colleges or universities. um, yeah, so James, as we've been talking so many valuable things in these few minutes. I could speak hours and hours with you. And just to conclude, I would love if you could share with our audience, what have you learned in the past few months, and with your experience that has been helpful during COVID-19. If you can share with us your learnings.
Well, I think the first learning with my experience doing educational technologies is that students are very driven in their
Mm,
career goals and in their coursework, and they aren't lazy.
mm,
But what they don't tolerate a whole lot of is if you waste their time. If you build a learning
mm,
platform that wastes a lot of their time, that they feel like they're just going through the motions or investing a lot of time in just the mechanics
mm,
of using the platform, then they really won't have a good experience. And so it's
mm,
very important to design user interfaces that really are very clear what students need to be doing, and that they feel like they're making progress and acquiring knowledge and consuming the content at a rate that they feel is very efficient use of their time. And
mm,
they, STEM majors in particular guard their time very jealously.
mm,
And so you want to make sure that they walk away feeling like that was a productive use of their time, engaging with that platform, and they feel like that they're going to get better grades because of it. So I think that's very important. And with COVID, I think it's also one of the things that I've always done is I've tried to imagine a student late at night. It's 1 a.m, their homework's due, in
yeah.
just another hour. And can you give them that real-time feedback and coaching? Because no one's around to help them. And that's
Mm,
why a lot of students give up on their major, and they just find the coursework too rigorous because their roommates are all out having a great time. And they're still
mm,
stuck at home working the third hour on their physics assignment, right?
mm,
And so I do kind of try to imagine what it's like to be them and why they might be struggling with the rigor of the course, and provide them that real-time feedback, and just give them that notion that if they just try a little harder, they'll get maybe a little bit of information from the system that'll help turn on that light bulb and make them able to make progress and understand what they're doing. And that's most important with COVID because they don't have the instructors and
mm,
TAs around to help them. And there's just
mm.
more of a distance between the students and faculty.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Very important two points that you mentioned here. We don't want students to waste their time because they got their time so much. We want them to have all the tools that they need in order to progress in their learning. And I think what you guys are doing is crucial to that. And the second point I love because you guys, you and your team, you've put yourself in the shoes of the faculty member, in the shoes of the students, so that they can really progress in their learning. And I think that is just crucial during COVID and even post COVID, as we think about education technology just changing the face of education and science education, as we knew it. James, I could speak hours and hours with you. I am just so happy for the work that you guys are doing, much needed for this world. Thank you so much for sharing your experience with us. This will be very useful for the Lab4U community and for the LabFlow community as well. Thank you so much, James.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I appreciate it, Kamal.
Awesome. And here ends my conversation with the brilliant James Caras, who is a great edtech entrepreneur, STEM educator, and a product builder that is saving time for TAs, faculty members, and helping students progress in their science education and in their lab works and lab learning. We're very grateful for the work that James and his team are doing with LabFlow. Thank you so much for listening, and see you in the next episode.